We'd like to welcome you into a moment of storytelling. To show, not just tell, the impact of local journalism. 3 women will come to this stage to help you see how journalism can matter to a daughter, a community, and an entire state. Now, this moment is not a TED Talk, it's not Toastmasters. This is storytelling based on visiting. And you all know how to visit. You open your heart and your mind, and you pay attention to someone you care about, to whom you want to feel closer. Each of these people have volunteered to work on their stories for 2 months in order to share them here with you. Some may be difficult to hear, particularly if you have experience caring for an elder relative or a loved one. I'd like to welcome our first storyteller, Cathy.
Life wasn't always easy for my beautiful, amazing, and talented mother, Joanne Thompson. Raised by an alcoholic father, widowed at a young age with 2 small children to raise, and losing her second husband to cancer. But she had the most amazing attitude, and she always persevered. She knew that in order to get through the difficult times, she needed a destination, and for her, that was joy in the everyday things. Her children and grandchildren and many friends, her church and beloved Red Hat ladies, her successful career in sales, and a lifetime of volunteer work. One of my mother's proudest moments was when she was honored by Sun Sounds of Arizona for her weekly radio show, Second Mile, which ran for 25 consecutive years. Truly, I could have had no better inspiration to lead me and no better friend. Losing her to dementia, seeing her gregarious personality fade by degrees was gut-wrenching. Trust me, the decision to place your elderly loved one in a long-term care facility is one you will agonize over every day. People will say to you, those places are horrible, and you'll be consumed by guilt. So you'll do your due diligence, and you'll try to find the best place possible. First and foremost on your mind is, will my loved one receive quality care in a safe environment? All right, maybe they'll serve rubber chicken too often for dinner, but nothing bad will happen, right? In February of 2020, the pandemic hit, and the assisted living facility where my mother was residing went on lockdown. Confined to her room 24/7 and allowed no visitors, her dementia escalated at an alarming rate, and she began to wander. The facility gave me 2 weeks to either hire 24-hour private care or remove her. Those were very difficult days for me, and I would sit in my office sobbing over what to do. The cost of private care was astronomical. Because of COVID, every place I called wasn't taking new residents. And while I considered bringing my mom into my home, my tri-level house with its 3 sets of stairs and balcony, I was convinced was a death trap for someone with dementia who wandered. I felt lost and hopeless and overwhelmed, and I couldn't imagine persevering and finding the joy like my mother always did. One day someone recommended a nearby memory care facility, and they were taking new residents. Best of all, they had an outdoor courtyard where I could visit my mom. Because of COVID, I wasn't allowed inside the building, so I had to trust that she was being well cared for and well supervised. Whenever I visited, she would take my cheeks in her hands and she would kiss me. And this childhood gesture let me know that a part of her still remembered me. One evening, my phone rang, and when I saw the memory care manager's name and number, I knew immediately something was wrong. No way was he calling me at 7:30 for a trivial matter. Our conversation is etched forever in my memory. He first asked me, has anyone contacted you yet about your mother? No, why? What happened? Well, she was found with blood on her face. Blood on her face? What do you mean? He didn't know. He wasn't there at the moment, but as a precaution, they sent her to the hospital in an ambulance. When I heard the words, as a precaution, I told myself, all right, it's not that bad. My mom's going to be okay. I was worried, naturally, but I wasn't panicking. At the hospital, a nurse came and fetched me. And as we're walking down the hall, she says over her shoulder, "Have you talked to the police yet?" "The police?" "Yeah, they were here earlier looking for you." "Why would the police want to talk to me?" What she said next shattered my world. "Your mother was assaulted by another resident at the facility." At that very moment, we turn and walk into the exam room, and I see my tiny, frail mother lying curled on a gurney. Her head is swaddled in bloody bandages. Her eyes are black and blue. Her face and neck and chest are covered with open wounds, and her right hand is bandaged and splinted and heavily bandaged. Blood on her face as a precaution. We sent her to the hospital. No, this scene was something out of my worst nightmare, and I struggled to process it. After that, everything was a blur. People came and went. My mom was taken for tests. At one point, I asked a young resident, "Is my mom going to survive her injuries?" And he didn't know. Later, I asked the attending doctor the same question. He didn't know either, but he suggested I prepare for the worst. The following morning, I was put in the impossible situation of having to choose how my mother would die. Her right hand had been completely degloved of skin, and without surgery, she would likely contract a painful and life-threatening infection. However, her odds of surviving the surgery were slim. Best case scenario, she came through the surgery and passed peacefully and relatively free of pain. I made the only decision I could, and while the surgery was considered a success, my mom never roused. The next afternoon, having really no other choice, we transferred her to a hospice home, and I learned something then. Dying can be a very lengthy process. And as I sat in that quiet, dark room with my mom, watching her slowly die, I did a lot of thinking, and I also got very angry. I wondered how in the world had this happened to her? Was it some random act? Was she her assailant's only victim? I knew in my gut there was more to the story than what the facility had told me, which was your mom wandered into the room of another resident and was beaten with 2 heavy metal hangers. At the time, there had been some stories in the news about abuse and neglect at local nursing homes, and while I hadn't paid much attention then, sitting with my mom, those stories haunted me. And I realized I had a choice. I could either chalk my mom's death up to a tragic accident or attempt to pull the curtain back on the long-term care industry's dark secrets. On impulse, I fired up my laptop and I went to the Arizona Republic's website where I found a Share Your Story button. Quickly, before I lost my courage, I submitted a brief description of what happened to my mom and a couple pictures. After that, I focused on her and the remaining time we had together. I had no idea what, if anything, would transpire from my actions. A week or so later, Caitlin McGlade, an investigative reporter with the Arizona Republic, reached out to me. She was kind and she was sympathetic, and she asked me if I was willing to talk about my mom, and believe me, I was. Our meeting was a pivotal moment for me and the start of incredible changes. The one person who could do the most good came into my life at the exact right time. Some things I believe are meant to be.
When Cathy's email came across my desk, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All the note said was my mom was killed by a resident down the hall at my assisted living facility. And so I picked up the phone, and though I didn't know what I was getting myself into, I knew one thing: this woman must be strong. She must be brave. My mom had died a couple years prior, and I couldn't even talk about it without having a panic attack. And here was this woman whose mom was killed, and she reached out to the press a week later. When I got her on the phone, Cathy said she wanted change. And then I summoned some of her strength, and I said, "Can I come to your mom's memorial?" And she said yes. I have several funeral dresses. I've been to a lot of these things, not usually for work. On this day, I wore a black and white polka dot dress and black heels, and as I clicked into the funeral home, I tried to stuff down my own grief. And I met Cathy and her daughter, Caitlin, who spells her name the same way as me. And I don't think I said much because I know that I'm sorry means nothing when your mom just died. So I walked around the room, taking in the artifacts of Joanne's life. She was a painter, a potter, a dancer, a poet. She was published in magazines. She read to blind people on the radio. And her mom, and her husband had died when her kids were young in a car accident. This woman knew profound grief, the kind that suddenly rips into your life's fabric and alters it forever. Joanne had an open casket. I wandered into the room where her body was, and I felt like a voyeur as I looked at her, like we often do in journalism, meeting people only in death or only in tragedy. But the thing about journalism is that the story doesn't end there. So I looked at her wounds covered up, and I thought, I am going to uncover everything that was done wrong to you. And you are going to make a change. So I called Cathy's attorney a couple days later. And her attorney told me that residents in assisted living facilities, particularly memory care units, hurt each other a lot more than you would think because the staff is inadequate or there's not enough of them. They mix up people's medication and people spiral into crisis mode, or these facilities put residents in positions that scare them, like having a new roommate or having someone wander into their room. And largely, the facilities get away with this and just move on. And I said, can you put me in touch with some of your clients? He said he'd had several that had been through this. And he said no. It's like, okay, well, does the state track resident injuries? And he said no. And I said, well, do you have any idea how I might be able to track the gravity of this problem? And he said no. So, like any reporter would do, I hung up and I cursed a lot. And then I went to rules and regulations. There had to be some sort of law that required assisted living facilities to report to the state agency that licensed them when residents get hurt, right? In Arizona, not really. The facilities have to report to Adult Protective Services, which keeps everything it does a secret and is notorious for not doing its job effectively. And they have to report to police. So police it was. The problem with tracking statewide problems with police reports is that you are dealing with multiple different sources across multiple different regions. You have to convince multiple different people to give you what you're asking for, and then if you get it, it's in multiple different formats, and then you have to standardize it. And I was looking at 400 different addresses. So I suggested to my boss at the time that maybe we do a sample of random addresses around the state. And my boss at the time, Michael Braga, he's an all or nothing guy, he said, do them all. I was like, this feels impossible. I had 400 addresses, and I spent a couple of days putting them in buckets, determining which police jurisdiction they were part of. And I ended up with like 45 police jurisdictions. It felt impossible. But then again, so did calling the press a week after your mom died in a very violent way. So for Joanne, the Pulliam fellow that we had at the time, Joe Duhownick, and I, we came up with a bunch of public records requests for all these different police agencies, and we asked for calls for service. And then we would get back calls for service at all of these addresses, and we would look for some pretty heavy stuff. Assaults, aggravated assault, sexual assault, domestic violence, rape, homicide, things that you don't expect to happen at places that people trust to take care of their vulnerable, fragile moms and dads and grandparents. And once we determined the reports that we were interested in based on calls for service, we then put out more requests for the actual police records, the narratives that would explain to us what was going on. And that took some wrangling. A lot of police departments, as you can imagine, initially balked at the volume of stuff I was asking for. They said, this is just too much, you're asking for too many documents, you need to narrow your requests. And I was like, no, my request is narrowed. I need these 25 police reports from your jurisdiction. And then I would get on the phone and I would tell them about Joanne. I would tell them that police departments were the only place that I could find out about other people that were in similar situations as Joanne, and to hold accountable the facilities that let this happen to them. So most of the time, the police departments were moved. The records custodians wanted to also be strong and do the work for Joanne. As we started getting narratives in, it was pretty tedious work, right? We wanted to know a lot of things. We wanted to know how many, what facilities had multiple incidents. We wanted to know how frequently residents had repeat problems. We wanted to know how often injuries resulted in, how often altercations resulted in injuries, hospitalization, death. We wanted to know how many of the time, how often residents who were hurting other people also seemed like they were being neglected. And we roped in several reporters to help us in the newsroom. It kind of became an all-hands-on-deck thing for a moment. But one of the colleagues who had helped us was Melina Walling, our bioscience reporter at the time at the Arizona Republic. And she was writing a story about the science of dementia for our series. Like what happens to your brain with the disease that might cause you to lash out and get violent. Like we wanted people to understand that the folks hurting other folks, including the woman that hurt Joanne, were also victims of the system. The woman that hurt Joanne had an untreated UTI that had gone to her kidneys. She had cellulitis so bad that the doctors said that it was like akin to having multiple broken bones. She had the worst case of childhood PTSD that the psych eval people had seen. That plus dementia, the facility wasn't taking care of her. And we wanted to find all of this in these police reports to show that this was happening. So Melina Walling asked me, as we're entering stuff into this database, how are you coping with all of this terrible stuff that we're entering into this database? And I was like, I guess I really hadn't thought about it. I had become a machine. I had left my grief at Joanne's casket. That didn't last for very long. As soon as I started interviewing people who were the rows in my database, I learned a lot. I spent several hours with a family whose mom was killed by her roommate. It was the second death that we found. And it was excruciating. Immediately after that, I had scheduled a phone call with a couple of bureaucrats to find out how they do their jobs when they do inspections of facilities, when they survey facilities. And they were speaking in code. They were like deficiencies, surveys, corrective action plans, like as if all this stuff that's happening to people was paperwork. And I got mad. Like I got really mad. And instead of the call being about me learning how they do or don't do their regulatory jobs, it became about me telling them everything that had happened to Joyce, the woman who had just spent her time with her family, and all the things that are happening in the facilities that they regulate that they don't know about. And I hung up a little embarrassed. So I vowed to give myself some space after emotional interviews, and spent the next several months just interviewing facility directors that didn't hang up on me. Working with my colleague Sahana Jayaraman on continuing to build out that database, writing 12 drafts because we wanted to encapsulate everybody's grief and corporate greed and regulatory failures all in not too many words, but enough. I had to tell families things that they didn't know about their loved ones. Like, I had to tell this woman that her mom hurt not just one person who she knew about, but two. And her attorney told me that I did irreparable damage and that I should have let the second death go. But the daughter of the woman who hurt people thanked me for the truth. And the family of the woman who got hurt told me they felt free. So I spent another couple of months after that doing more interviews, building out that database, going back and forth, like, am I telling people too many things that they don't want to know? Am I dredging up misery? Am I hurting people because I'm telling them things that they didn't know and maybe would have been better off not knowing? Am I doing the right thing? And we published about a year and a half after Cathy reached out to me. And I was curled up on the couch at my colleague Sahana's studio apartment. I hadn't left for days. Like, my cat was at my boyfriend's house. I couldn't take care of anything. And I was staring at my phone after we published, waiting for Cathy McDavid to text me. And she did. And she said, "This is everything my mother would have wanted." And I cried a lot. I cried for Joanne. I cried for Joyce. I cried for the women that hurt Joanne and Joyce. I cried for every person in my database. And I cried for my mom. And then Sahana and I went out into the desert, sat by a creek on a bunch of rocks, and tried to save these little caterpillars from jumping in the water and drowning. And we waited. We waited for authorities to take action.
My mom is from Hawaii. She's Japanese American. She came to San Francisco when Pearl Harbor got hit. She was 2 years old. She is a mother, a sister, a grandmother, very dear to our family. When my mom got dementia, it was heartbreaking to see her go from a vibrant teacher and mentor and my mom to a child. And I didn't realize the task I had at hand. I was, oh, I'm Superwoman. I'm gonna take care of my mom. It's gonna be in the house, and I'm gonna make sure she's comfortable. And none of that was gonna be reality, because when you deal with a dementia patient, they are delusional, they are aggressive, they wander. There's so many layers to that onion. So I made the hard decision, and I called my brother, and I was like, we're gonna have to put her in an assisted living home. I can't do this. I'm working full time. I'm a single mom. I can't do this. So I looked for the best home I could get her in, and it was 10 minutes from my house, and it was beautiful on the outside, and I was like, okay, it's working out. Then I went along with my life, visited her, and I went and my daughter got married, so I was gone for a couple weeks. I get home, I didn't get to see my mom for a little bit, and I get a call and they tell me, Renee, you've got to go over to the facility because your mom has wounds on her legs. And I'm like, wounds on her legs? What happened? They're like, we don't know, but you need to go there. So I went, and I found my mom with wounds on her legs. Her feet were swollen, her legs were swollen. She had an infection, and I was devastated. I was only gone a couple weeks, and I trusted these people to take care of my mom. In order for it not to go into a further infection, I made them call the ambulance, and they picked her up. Prior to this, my mom was, a couple months prior to this, my mom was going in her room to go to bed. There was a male patient in her bed. She told him to leave. He attacked her and punched her in the face. The facility called me the next day, and they flew their director out on an overnight flight, and they made it sound like my mom is, okay. They moved her to another cottage in the facility. This is a one-off situation. The guy got kicked out of the facility, and of course I went to go see my mom, and I had them, had the doctors look over her and everything, and they assured me this would never happen again. It took me 2 years to put my mom in that facility. It was the fear of they're in charge, and I don't want to rock this boat because the hospice was telling me if I moved my mom, it would be devastating to her and she probably would die sooner. So I made the decision to keep her there. Fast forward, now she's got this disease in her legs. She can't walk. She could walk before. She was mobile. And I was angry, and I went home, and I remembered an article that my friend had said, you need to look up this article. So I did. It was Caitlin. Caitlin wrote the article she was talking about prior, and I looked at that article, and it was about my mom. So I emailed Caitlin, and 5 minutes later she called me. She was like, I've been looking for you. They wouldn't give me your name. And then she told me of the violent attack that happened to my mother, and I was devastated. I was lied to by the facility. They did not tell me there was a police report. They did not tell me that my mom was attacked to the point where 4 people had to drag this man off of her and lock her in a bathroom. They did not tell me that there was another gentleman in the kitchen that was viciously attacked by this man. Most importantly, they didn't tell me that there was a video cam of this, and that this person who attacked my mom was off his schizophrenic medicine. Why you're putting a schizophrenic patient in with dementia patients, I don't understand. So I took action. Caitlin hooked me up with AARP's Vice President, Dana Kennedy. I went to all the meetings and ended up in front of the legislature. I talked to a senator, Wendy Rogers. She tweeted my story because she said her father suffered from dementia. And they passed legislation. There were 2 bills they were trying to do. One was to put cameras in the facility. The other one was to put more education in helping the people that take care of the elderly, to educate them on how to do that, because it's very different with dementia and Alzheimer's patients. The bill passed for the education part, did not pass for the camera part in the facility, but it passed, and we were able to do something amazing that I felt like if I didn't talk to that senator, that wouldn't have happened. If I didn't get Caitlin's story, that wouldn't have happened. And I say this to say, all of this to say, we all are going to end up elderly. We have parents, aunts, uncles, cousins that are going to end up elderly. Alzheimer's is huge. It affects so many people. And when it's in your backyard, it's very hard to navigate. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Caitlin's reporting. And I just want to encourage all of you to report. Do the investigation work, because there is good in this community. There's still people that want to fight. And my mom, rest in peace, she's in a better place, but I'm her voice, and I hope you all heard me today.
For months after losing my mother, I wasn't able to properly grieve. I was so busy taking care of the business that comes when someone dies. But my many conversations with Caitlin and the video interview I did opened the floodgates, and I was at last able to mourn my loss. And with that came a new purpose: improving the quality of life for residents in long-term care facilities. From the moment the first article was published, my new life began to take shape. Caitlin connected me with individuals from ARP and the Arizona Alzheimer's Association. Through them, I met with legislators and the governor's aide. I testified at committee hearings, and I attended stakeholder meetings. I appeared on local television news and a national radio news show. Let me say that again, and a national news show. I was at the Capitol along with Caitlin on the day that Arizona passed its most sweeping long-term care reform bill in 5 years. And that would not have happened with the more than dozen articles that Caitlin and her team published and the awareness that was raised. I spoke at the governor's press conference on the day she signed that bill into law, and it was one of the highlights of my life. Through my advocacy work, I have at last found the joy I thought had eluded me, although it's been bittersweet. I lost someone I dearly loved, but I've been an agent of change, and I'll continue to be. I'd like to think my mother would be proud of me and pleased that her story has been used to help so many people. Had she lived, she would be 94 years old today. It's her birthday. And I want to thank you for celebrating with me in a way that truly honors her. I'll back up.
Thank you for everything you did for your community. And thank you for sharing your moms with us. It is the courage of everyday people that powers our journalism to make a difference. As journalists, we can write the stories, but without people like you who take action, our words may just be words on a page, on a screen, on air. Thank you. We hope these stories resonated with you. And as you go into the break and the rest of your day, remember there are Caitlin's and Cathy's and Renee's in communities across the country. Journalists, advocates, and courageous people, including many of you in this room, who shine a light on injustice and seek change. It is up to us to ensure this work continues. Thank you.